Hello everyone, thanks for coming. Today is the final session of Case Interviews Cracked. Today is part 4 of our 4-session series, and today we'll be covering market entry cases. Before we get into that, let's do a quick recap of what we had learned yesterday. So we were dealing with profitability cases. We looked at the basic profitability framework, which involved dividing profits into revenues and costs, revenues further into its revenue streams, and if there are products involved, you can break it down into average price per unit multiplied by total number of units. And on the cost side, we saw how we can understand fixed costs and variable costs, the differences between each of them, and then how we can further break down the costs, such as variable, across the value chain from raw materials to sales and marketing. The second thing that we looked at was the value chain approach and how it is a fundamental piece of isolating a problem. We saw that if there is a sales decline issue, often it's a good thing to break the problem or try to isolate where does the problem lie across the value chain. Is it a production issue? Is it a distribution issue? Or is it a customer pull issue? And lastly, we also saw that how to benchmark against the competition, and not just the competition, but also with your own client on a certain time scale. So we talked about how it's a good idea to ask the question, but since when has this problem been happening? If it's been happening over a time scale, then you can try and identify the drivers by benchmarking against your own time scale. Or if it's a company-specific issue as opposed to an industry-wide issue, then you can benchmark against your own competition.
So today we'll look at the next case type, which is market entry, right? So very quickly, market entry is rather the largest case among the 3 cases that we've seen so far, right? Market entry, as the name suggests, is basically your client trying to move into a new product or a geography or trying to target new customers, right? So there are 3 main types. New geography, wherein the client tries to move to a new place and start a business there or expand his current business there, right? For example, Uber moving to China is a classic example of market entry into a new geography, right? The second type of market entry case is the client trying to introduce a new product. So for example, Apple trying to make from moving from iPhones and MacBooks to the Apple Watch is a good example of new product, right? And targeting a new customer segment. So maybe say an apparel brand, if it targets only male customers initially, it trying to start its services for for females too is a good example, right? For example, Flyrobe, they are now starting it for males, so that's a good example of new customer segment. So these are the 3 types of market entry cases that you will generally be solving, right? A few examples of how the cases would come across would be this. Your client is a luxury car manufacturer and they want to enter the Indian market. First of all, the client wants to know whether this is a good idea. Can this be done? And if yes, how do they go about it? Another example would be that your client is a conglomerate looking to enter the apparel market, right? They want to identify the market entry strategy. So these are all market entry questions. So let's look at the overall approach now.
So just to recap, in terms of for all case interviews, we outlined how there are 3 pieces of problem solving. The first is asking the right preliminary questions. The second is having a customized overall approach for that specific case. And then the third aspect was always having a MECE framework or a mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive framework. And Mayuresh will take you through how market entry has its own overall approach to solving the case.
Right. So in market entry, you will have to answer 2 main questions. First one, is there enough opportunity? Is the market attractive, right? And we'll look individually into how to answer this question and what are the objective parameters you need to look at to sort of get the answer to this question. But this is the first question that you need to answer. Is the market enterable? Does it look like a good market? And secondly, if yes, then how do you enter this market? Do you have the ability or sufficient capability to enter this market? If not, what are the moves that you need to take in order to enter the market, right? So let's start with, is the market attractive, right? Let's see how do we understand whether the market is attractive or not. It's very simple to understand how the market is attractive. Basically, if the company can make profits by entering this market, is when it would be logical to enter the market, right? So we will just calculate the profits or potential profits in the new geography, in the new product line, or for the new customer segment, and see if it makes sense for the kind of investment that you do. If the profits make sense, then it would make sense to enter this market, right? And only then would that market be called an attractive market. So your profits are market size, which you will do in a guesstimate in this market entry, multiplied by the market share, which the interviewer will possibly tell you, or you will have to give a subjective sort of justification to why the market share can be high or low, or whether we can target a certain market share, right? Multiplied by the profit per unit, right? So for each unit you make some profit, and that you'll multiply by all the units, right? Minus the investment that you do, the fixed cost, the overhead costs that you have. This will be the potential profit for a certain period, of course, and then there would be the profit would obviously keep on increasing as you go ahead, right? So this is your main sort of formula to calculate the potential profits. Sometimes the objective of the client might be revenues. Like they would say that the objective is revenues, and you will possibly have to calculate only revenues. The only difference that would create is you will not look at the fixed cost, right? By looking at these profits, you can answer one, is it viable to enter this market, right? If they're not making any profits, then it's not going to be viable, right? You cannot burn cash to enter a new market.
Even if the numbers, let's say 100 crores or 1000 crores, you can take the call of the interviewer, like what is an attractive range of profits for you, and if the answer falls in that range, then you can go ahead with the market entry.
Right. And you can also calculate the payback period. Now, unless you are asked to, you don't really need to calculate the payback period, that you will recover your investments in, say, 2 years or 3 years or whatever, right? So these are the two questions that you will be able to answer. And if both get positive answers, then the market is attractive, right? So just to summarize, since a lot of new people are coming in, so far we just saw an overall approach to market entry cases. In order to solve market entry cases, we answered two important questions. The first one is the market attractive? And the second one is how to enter the market if it is attractive indeed, right? And we just went deeper into how to understand whether the market is attractive or not. So in order to understand that, we just simply calculate the potential profits in the new market, right? In the new geography or with the new product line or so on. So profits are your market size, which you will estimate through a guesstimate. A lot of times the interviewer will also simplify it for you, right? Multiplied by the market share, which is something that the interviewer will possibly give you, or you will have to give your subjective justifications for a market share that you assume. That multiplied by profit per unit. This you can calculate by asking the interviewer the price of the product and the cost of the product that they incur, right? And fixed cost to enter the new market, because there would be infrastructure and so many other things that the client will have to spend. So this is your basic formula to understand whether a market is attractive or not. Again, this will give you an idea of whether it is viable. The final number that you get might be 1 crore, might be 100 crore, might be billions of dollars, but you won't be able to make sense of the number on its own. You should always compare that number to some other number for it to make sense. Typically, you can compare it to the fixed investment that the client does, or you can ask the interviewer whether this suits the target of profits that they want to make, right? Or you can calculate the payback period, but unless you're asked to, you don't need to calculate the payback period, right? All right, let's move to the next step, next question that you need to answer: how to enter the market. So in order to answer how to enter the market, you have to basically look at the value chain again, right? You have to understand which part of the value chain the client wants to enter, right? Now we saw what a value chain means yesterday, and it's the same value chain again. So ask the interviewer whether our client wants to enter the production or the manufacturing part of the value chain, or do they want to enter the distribution and retailing? Do they have enough capacity for retailing and distribution and supply of this product, right? And finally, is the sales and marketing also in-house, or are we going to have third-party are we going to outsource any of these, right? Now, the client might have all of these being done on their own, or they might outsource one or two of these, right? You might want to ask the question, what are our strengths and weaknesses in general as a company and in this particular market? Compare that with competitors. And if we lack in any of these parts of the value chain, then you can consider acquiring or doing a joint venture with competitors or with smaller players in the market, right? That will again get case specific, but that is how you will decide how to enter the market. So if you are not, yeah. Yeah, so comparing your strengths and weaknesses is essentially like a short form of SWOT, right? So you basically look at where your strengths lie. For example, if you are a post company, right? You send, you deliver postal thing, right? So you have a really good network across the country. That means your distribution network is good enough. So you can enter an area where you need that distribution network, and so on. So you need to know your strengths and weaknesses, and according to that you can decide whether we should enter on our own, or we should do a joint venture, or we should acquire a player before we enter, right? Typically acquiring a player will mean that you will get the market share beforehand. That can be one of the major objectives, right? You will also want to answer if there are any barriers to entry to this market, right? So always ask these questions to your interviewer. Are there any barriers to entry in this market? Typical barriers to entry would be, are there any legal ramifications of our entry into this market? Are we allowed to enter legally? Do we have the necessary infrastructure, technical capability, and so on? Do we have the capital expenditure required for shifting to this new market? These are good barriers to entry. You might not have one or two of these, and then you might want to think of solutions around it which are specific to the case again. So how to enter the market has two parts again. What part of the value chain do you want to enter? And two, are there any barriers to entry? Right? Any questions so far? So we looked at the overall approach. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't get you. Can you say that again?
It's a separate part. You can choose to ask the question before you go down the value chain, that are there any barriers to entry that I should know of? In fact, if you think of it, there could be a distribution barrier, there could be a production barrier, there could be a legal barrier which probably does not fit into any of these three. It's just another question to keep in mind while going through your mode of entry.
Right. So this is just the overall approach, and you will obviously dig deeper into all these questions, right? We'll go deeper into all these questions. So just to cover this again, two questions we're going to ask. First one is the market attractive enough for us? And two, if yes, how are we going to enter the market? Do we have sufficient capability to? That is your overall approach for any market entry type question, right? Okay.
So the purpose of frameworks is not to apply them in a hard and fast way. And the approach that we gave you is one of the approaches that you can use for solving market entry. We think that is the best approach, but you should explore all approaches and you should feel what you're most comfortable with. So one of the very common approaches that is used is a 3C1P approach. So this involves looking at the customer, then looking at the competition, then looking at company, and looking at finally the product. And here what you aim to do is you ask questions in each of these buckets and try and get a sense of if the market entry seems attractive from all of these perspectives, that we've got a good group of customers that want our product and we have something to offer to them, that the competition is not too intense and we can participate and have a differentiating advantage, that our internal capabilities exist, and that our product is very good too. So you can use this approach as well. But if you think about it, each of these 4 things are already factored into the approach that we mentioned to you. So for example, the customer bucket, all the questions that you ask in the customer bucket are essentially trying to arrive at the market size for your company. Who are the customers? What are the segments? What is the quantitative value of each of those segments? And you're trying to arrive at a market size. If you look at competition and product taken together, what you're essentially doing is you're doing a competitive benchmarking. You're trying to get a sense of what kind of market share that you can try and get. How is our product going to be different than whatever else is there in the market? And you're not only looking at direct competition, you might also be looking at indirect competition in the form of substitutes. So for example, digital cameras in 2005 not only had direct competitors in terms of other digital cameras, but also the cameras that were being used in smartphones. So the product and the competition bucket together is essentially competitive benchmarking, and that helps you arrive at a market share, which you saw in the previous approach. And when you look at company, what you're essentially trying to do is you're seeing, do we have the internal capability to even enter into the market? And that falls under the second question that Mayuresh had given, which was regarding how do we enter the market, where do we lie in the value chain, and what are the barriers that might be to entry.
And finally, so we'll just look at a few sample questions in each of these, right? I think Saransh covered most of it, but let's, for the sake of making notes and noting these questions down. So let's go one by one. The first one is your customers, right? Typical questions are, who are my customers? That's the basic question. Who exactly is my customer? What are the ages? What are the trends in these customer groups, right? That is an important question. How have these customer buckets been changing? Have there been changes? So you get to know the customer inside out. You also ask, what is the willingness to pay and purchasing power of these target customers? That's a very important question for your pricing and so on, right? So these are your questions for customer bucket. For competition, as we saw in profitability, competition is basically benchmarking your product with the competitor's product, or your structure with your competitor's structure, right? So your costs, your techniques, the sort of parameters you base your product on, that compared with the competitor's product.
Also
right?
getting a sense of how fragmented or consolidated is the industry, how many competitors are there, what is the market share of each of them.
Right. For company, you basically look at internal structure like Saran said. Do we have enough manpower? Do we have enough technical capabilities? Do we have the enough, are we deep pocketed enough to have the capital expenditure required for entering the new market and so on, right? And in product, it's again the same case specific questions. For example, yesterday our client was AC manufacturer, right? So good product question would be, what is the performance of our product based on? How is it a 2-ton AC? Do we manufacture a 1-ton AC or so on, right? What is the color of our ACs? Do we have any benefits, any monetary benefits, offers, discounts on our product and so on? So those would be case specific, but questions about our product will come in this bracket, right? So when you go by the 3C 1P bracket, you have to sort of address all of these one by one. So it's pretty exhaustive, but you won't be able to reason out why I'm asking these questions in the beginning. If you go by the approach where you first ask whether the market is attractive enough and then look at how to enter the market, you'll just be able to reason out your steps well, and it will follow a better flow in the interview. So it won't feel like you're trying to force fit a framework here, right? So this is one. Yeah.
Can we in general ask the interviewer that what is the vision or the motivation of the company when it's looking forward to a new product launch?
Yes,
Right.
in fact, that's a very good question. So you should always ask, what is the objective that you're trying to achieve by entering the market? Typically, companies are there to make profits, and what might vary is, are they looking to make profits in the short term or are they looking to make profits in the long term? To give you an example, when Amazon launched the Kindle ebook product, they were selling it at a price which was just achieving a break-even profit for them. But the reason that they were doing so is they wanted to launch a product, become the first hardware which would be compatible widely with all ebooks available, and hence later on get profits in terms of all the ebooks that they sell because they've created the first hardware out of it. So sometimes there can be strategic reasons, which is why a company initially might choose to make a loss, but eventually they again always have the objective of profits. So in fact, one of the very good preliminary questions that you can ask during a market entry case is, on what parameters should I evaluate whether the market entry is justified or not? Is it going to be profits? Is it going to be break-even period, etc.?
I think the objective of the company should be the first question in market entry. You should always ask it unless the company really specifies. Yeah.
Also, when we are trying to ask them that how much profit are they looking forward to, like you ask, like you told us similar question that what is a good sense of profits for the company. So can we talk about their turnover or profits in respect to what the company is already dealing with? Like,
Right. Comparing with the current revenues and profits of the company, yeah, that's a good number to compare to if you have the data. If the interviewer gives you that data, that's a good figure to benchmark it. Typically, you can ask the interviewer whether this makes sense. If we do have the data, I would like to compare it to a few numbers, and then we can ask for the required data. Right? All right.
for the customer, are we, like, can we ask them that, are we not expected to understand the customer? Like, we
Yeah.
said that what is the claim, like, what is the ability of claim of the customer? Are we not expected to know that once they have told that they are looking forward to say mobile phone? So,
Yeah, so a few common sense, again, like the only sort of things that you are expected to know would be common sense. That, say, for example, you won't really need to know like deep insights about your customer segments, right? But you can always make assumptions, verify those from your interviewer if you think those are intuitive and sort of make sense to you, right? So that's the only thing that you are expected to know. I've been always saying this. You're not expected to know anything other than things that already make sense. So yeah.
Wouldn't what part of the value chain the company wants to enter in and how the company wants to enter change whether the market is attractive or not?
Of course.
To a certain extent, you're right. So they are overlapping questions, essentially because your operating model also decides the profit per unit. So for example, if you are an end-to-end player, typically your profit margins are higher versus if you outsource certain aspects to it. So yes, to a certain extent, the two questions are not completely messy or completely different in that respect, but it's a good way of thinking of these two questions separately. You can always calibrate and you can always make your calculations more accurate depending on what the operating model or where we are going to lie in the value chain and see how that affects your profit per unit.
Not just profit per unit, like the fixed cost can also change, right?
Yes, yes. Depending on whether you choose to create a new distribution network, for example, that might have an impact of fixed costs. So in that sense, if that is one of your concerns, what you could do is, for the time being, I'd like to look at what our potential fixed costs could be. This would also depend upon our operating model, but let us assume that if you can ask the interviewer, should I assume that we will be only manufacturing, distributing, and then arrive at a tentative fixed cost, and later on you can go into the nuances once you've explored the operating model. Alternatively, you can also look at the value chain first and then come to the fixed costs later on.
Any more questions? All right. So we'll jump to a sample case that Saransh will solve today, right? A sample market entry case. Feel free to ask questions in the middle of the case, right? So, all right, let's begin. Your client is a telecom operator, a telecom company, right? And they want to enter the market for home security systems in India. And they've hired you to take this up for them. So is it a good market and how would you go about entering this market?
So a client is a telecom operator and they want to enter the home security market.
Right.
And the question is whether the market is attractive enough for them to enter.
Right.
I would just like to ask you a few preliminary questions. I'll just take 30 seconds.
Sure.
So I'd like to know what would be the objective of this market entry, because we're a telecom company and we're entering into a very distinct product category like home security equipment.
So our objectives are to make as much profits as possible And in fact, as a part of this exercise, we would want you to estimate the potential profits that we can make by entering this market.
All right. So our goal is to achieve a sizable profit, and
Right.
that would be part of the case.
Yes.
So once we estimate the profit, we can I can check with you
Yeah.
if that is a good range.
Right.
And secondly, in terms of our product, you mentioned it's a home security equipment. What exactly do we mean by that?
So our system is essentially an alarm system, which goes off when a burglary happens at your home, and that is the product that we sell. Yes, that is what we mean by home security system.
All right. So it's an alarm. It senses if there's a burglar, and then
Yeah.
it raises a sound. All right. And in terms of the geography, where are we based, and where is our market in terms of customers?
In India, we're based out of India, and our target segment is also India.
And do we have an initial idea of where would we lie in the value chain?
Yeah, so we are manufacturers of this product, right? So we make this
We
product.
want to manufacture
Yeah.
this product. Okay.
And we currently have, so since we are a telecom company, we have certain sort of expertise in distribution, but not a lot. So we would actually want you to sort of go about whether we should enter a particular value chain.
All right. I'll just take a moment to structure my thoughts in terms of the overall approach.
Right. Did someone have a question right now? What? What size? Font size. Oh, okay. Saransh. Yeah. All right. Yeah. But you know what is written so far, right? Okay. All right. All right. So you can note that he takes his time to sort of think through the approach, and he uses the time that he's taken. A lot of times when I see students solving cases in the first few cases, like first 5 cases, it gets kind of awkward before you ask, when you ask this 1 minute, and you have the urge to speak while you are thinking through your approach, right? Go right up till the last layer of your approach. Only when you are certain that it makes sense right till the end, only then should you sort of elaborate on your approach to the interview, right? Okay.
So the way I'd like to go about our case question is, I'd like to first answer whether the market is attractive from a profit standpoint.
Okay.
And to understand attractiveness, I'd like to break the problem in terms of what is the total market size,
Right.
multiplied by what is the market share we can expect to get initially, multiplied by the profit per unit that we sell, and minus the fixed investment that would be the initial costs of.
Sure. All right.
And the second question I'd like to ask is, what would be our mode of entry? Where would we lie in the value chain? You mentioned that production is something that we could consider, and distribution and
Yeah.
marketing is something that you want our opinion on.
Right. Right. Sure.
So I'd like to first go with the attractiveness.
All right.
I'd first like to estimate what would be the market size for something like home security equipments
Sure.
that you mentioned in India.
Right.
Can I go ahead and make
Yeah.
the calculation?
So we've actually done the calculation, but I would love to see your overall approach on getting this estimate. So just take some time and draw out the overall approach.
Sure.
Right? So now he's going to try and estimate the market size. Since this is a market entry question, I don't want to focus on the guesstimate part, right? Sometimes you might do it like an entire guesstimate exercise if it's a smaller guesstimate, but make sure that you are sort of aware of the kind of time that you are spending on this guesstimate, right? Because at the end of it, you have to answer so many other questions in this case, right? So it's all right if you don't do the numbers. Just take me through your overall approach, and we can.
Just give me another 10 seconds.
All right.
So what I'd like to do is, I'll start with the total population.
Okay.
And I'll divide it into urban and rural citizens.
All right.
And then that I'll divide by the average number of households to arrive at urban households and rural households.
Okay.
Then I'd like to look at for urban households, and the same thing will apply to rural.
Okay.
What is the affordability, or how many people can afford the home security equipment? And for that, I'd like to know what would be the price. And then once we know what percentage of the population can afford it, we'll look at what percentage of the population actually of that group actually needs the product, and we could classify them into, let's say, high risk and low risk areas, and higher risk areas might have a greater need for this home security.
Right. I think that seems like a good approach. We did something similar, and the final number of target units sold was one. So we sell it to one household, right? So the number of households that we got after this calculation was 15 million households.
All right. 15 million annually is roughly the. Okay.
So this is the market size. This is the number that I gave him. So since I didn't want to go into the guesstimate, right?
So the next thing that we'd like to look at is, of this total market size in India, what would be the market share that we can hope to achieve?
Right.
So I'd like to start by asking, who are the competitors in this industry, and what is the relative market share of each of them?
Right. So there's a long tail of small competitors. It's very fragmented, and everyone has around 5% of the market share.
Even the largest player has around 5% market
Yes,
share.
the largest has 5%, and that's our aim too. So in the first year, we want to achieve 5% market share.
Okay, so our aim is also to achieve 5% market share.
Yeah.
All right. This seems like a very fragmented industry where everyone has around 5% share. Do we know of what is the reason, or what drives this fragmented nature of the
Yeah,
industry?
so generally these are local players. So each local player has a stronghold on their regions, and the reason why the industry has developed in that particular fashion is that the raw materials required for manufacturing are procured from a particular area, processed there, and to reduce the transportation cost, we generally sell around a smaller sort of region, right?
Okay, so the transportation from the factory to the end customer is
Right.
expensive.
So transportation from raw materials to the processing unit, and from the processing unit to the end customer. So they want to minimize that transportation cost, and that is why the radius is generally smaller.
Okay, so you have local factories, and then they have a local market that they capture.
Yeah.
Sure, and that's why, because the radius of their market is small, so around 5% share.
Right.
For each.
Right.
Okay, that's interesting. I'll just take a moment here to think through what
Sure.
to do next. So we know that the largest player has 5% share. To be able to get a share equal to 5%, I want to understand if our product that we would sell would have any difference compared to what's available in the market.
No, it's not a differentiated product, and it's a commodity. So everyone sells the same product. In fact, we don't really have the technology to sort of design it on our own. We get the designs from somewhere, and we just put it together and assemble it.
And everyone else is also doing something.
Yeah.
So the product is more or less the same.
Right.
And is there a possibility that we could improve the product?
No,
have a
it's
marked difference?
no. The technology here is almost stagnated,
Okay.
and there's no chance.
Alright.
Yeah.
So the product is the same. Can we do something on the price? Maybe offer it at a lower price so that we can get more of the price sensitive customers.
How would that benefit us?
So because we have a lower price,
Right.
Assuming that we can also have a cost lower than competition,
Right.
we can then capture a greater market share because customers will then buy our product, which is
Right.
priced lower.
So the question that you are asking is, can we reduce the cost in some way?
Right.
Right. So I suppose there might be options, but I can't think of any. Can you sort of explore a few alternatives for me?
For on the cost side.
Cost
or-
side, yeah.
Okay. So for that, I'd like to know what will be what is the what is the current cost of manufacturing the product for us
Right.
vis-a-vis what it's going to be for competition, and then I would like to benchmark where possibly we could reduce the cost.
I think that in terms of the manufacturing and in terms of the transportation, we've sort of done that analysis, and there are mostly dead ends in terms of reducing those costs, manufacturing and so on, and even the distribution ones. It seems to be difficult to renegotiate margins with our retailers and distribution channels. So even that is sort of a dead end. So I don't think we can really reduce the cost here.
So I'll exclude the cost aspect.
Yeah.
So we know that on the production front, we have the similar price, similar product, and so not much chance to differentiate. You mentioned also on the distributor front, there's very little to do. We know that everyone else has a local market. Is there any way in which we can reduce our distribution costs and supply to a greater area?
Right, that seems like an interesting approach. Maybe we can do that. Let's come to that later. How about we calculate the profit?
Okay.
Per unit,
So
right?
then we know that 5% is perhaps the maximum market share that we
Yeah.
can achieve.
Yeah.
Okay, should we go ahead with 5%?
Yeah, let's
as a
assume
share?
5% for now. I think we are positive to get that market share.
All right. The next thing I'd like to do is compute what would be the profit per unit.
Right.
And for that, I'd like the information in terms of what is the price at which we are selling and what is the cost at which we are making the unit.
Right. So the price of our units ranges from about 5 to 15,000 rupees.
Okay.
Right. And you typically get about 10% of profit margins on this. Our cost is 90% of this. Right.
Okay. Right. And this is the total price, and that's the
Right. Right. This is our pricing scheme. Yes.
All right. And do we know why is there a range of 5 to 15,000? Why not a specific
Because this
price?
depends on the size of the home.
Okay.
So the cost is directly proportional to how many rooms and how large the house is. If it's a much larger bungalow with 4 rooms and a living
So
room.
small houses around 5,000.
Yeah, 5K, and the larger ones are around 15K.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is this all the information on the price front?
Yeah, so you can assume there are 3 broad variants: 5,000, 10,000, and 15,000. That is typically our range.
Right. So then I'll just quickly compute given we have 15 million households, I guess we need to know what is the split across small, medium, and large. Can we assume to be a third?
Yeah, they are about evenly distributed. So you can assume that it's 33% for all. 30%.
Okay, so that way we can arrive at an average price per unit of around 10,000 rupees.
Yeah,
So I'll just calculate the total profit pool that we
right,
have.
right.
So at 15 million households, with an average price of 10,000 rupees and a profit margin of 10%, we get roughly 1,500.
We get
crores as
15 billion is what you're saying.
And of course, I need to multiply this by the market share.
Right.
So that will give us roughly 75 crores as the profit pool
Okay.
that we can expect to get.
Right. I think we are investing in terms of our fixed investments. It's something like 5 to 10 crores is what we are estimating it to be.
All right.
So I think the profit that we've estimated seems like a decent number as of now.
All right. So we know in that sense that the market is attractive. We estimate a profit pool of around 65 crores at steady state
Right.
when we achieve the 5% market share. The next thing I'd like to do is I would like to look at what kind of operating model we will have and see where should we lie in the value chain and how to go about that.
All right, please go ahead.
Okay. So I'd like to first start with production. We know that we'll need to manufacture at steady state roughly 15 million multiplied by 5%, that's roughly 15 crores, 7.5 crore units. Is that something that we can manufacture at our facility?
Yeah, we've sort of thought this through, and we have a good manufacturing and assembly unit. So yes, we can.
We can achieve at that capacity, and we have the internal capability.
Yes, we have the labor and we have the technology, so it doesn't seem to be an issue.
All right. Any other entry barriers in terms of when we enter the market that we should worry?
Not really.
about
I
on
think
the
it's,
production front.
no, it doesn't seem to be the issue.
So I think the next thing we can then look at is do we have the distribution reach required to achieve a 5% share?
Right.
You mentioned that this is an industry which is very localized.
Yeah.
I would suggest that we can identify pockets where there are lower or the demand is not being fulfilled or competitors are charging a high price.
Right.
And try and target those pockets.
Right.
But it will also be dependent on what is the right location for our factory so that fixed costs are minimized.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Right. So distribution, do we have the capability to handle it on our own? You mentioned we are a telecom operator.
Yeah, we have certain expertise in that area, so
Alright.
we would be able to do that.
So we know that we can both handle production, distribution, and as well supply to the customers.
Right.
And in terms of marketing, etc., we will have.
I think we are capable there. We function nationwide in our telecom sector, so we have a decent brand for our company. So I think that seems to be a good exhaustive analysis of things. How about you summarize now?
Sure, I'll just do that. Give me 15 seconds.
Sure. Yeah. It is investment for this particular new move. So it's not annual investment. It's not the recurring cost. That has been taken into account in this 10%. So we say that for every 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 of product, we only get the 10% as our profits, 90% is the cost. That is the recurring cost. This one, 5 crore, the fixed investment, is something like the cost required to set up that first unit, right? That's the fixed cost, one time. Yeah, that you will be able to see that the payback period is something like 3 years. So by 3 years, we won't be making any profits. Possibly even we will be in negative profits. But then at certain break-even point, we'll make 0 profits and then move ahead and make profits. And then you can ask the question whether it makes sense for the company to do that. And if it does, then fair enough. For example, Flipkart did not run into profits for a long time. But it made sense for them to target market share initially and then move on to profit, right? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Right. So he actually sort of assumed, he sort of said that affordability is one of the parameters that we look at to cut this data and see who can afford this product and who cannot. But we did not go into that calculation because it was not a part of the case. But good point though. The cost or price of the product really impacts who is going to be able to buy it. Another good question, or rather the same question could have been framed in a way that what is the willingness to pay of the customers, right? It sort of gets you the same data. But yeah, good point. Mm-hmm. Increase the market share is what you're saying, right? But reduce the margins. Okay, that could have been a way to go about it. Yeah, sure, right.
So one of the things there, for example, we did is there a possibility to reduce our price, and that stems from trying to reduce our costs.
Right.
So reducing our price to achieve a higher market share was one of those things.
Yeah. That is exactly what we did, like sort of. Right. It's one of the points we didn't touch upon, the question that could have sort of unearthed this particular part is what is the strength of our company, right? Which is the current distribution network that we have because we are a nationwide telecom company, right? So we are spread across the nation, whereas our competitors in the home security system are local. So that is one very good advantage that we have over them, which sort of directly leads to your point that we could then reduce the margins and so on. But when he asked the question directly, can we reduce our cost in distribution? I sort of answered that that is a dead end and we cannot do that because it was not a part of the case for now. But yeah, that's a good point. You can highlight something like this if it has not been discussed in the case otherwise. Yeah. Yes.
But you usually assume that all these 15 million are, do not already have these security alarms installed. Like what aftermarket?
Hence the market share, right? Market share essentially factors out the households that will go for another security system or who already have a security system. Hence you have 5% of this 15 million as your final group, which is your revenue stream, right? Does that make sense?
There's no differentiation in the product.
Mm-hmm.
You already have a plan, but you will have to factor the market share count that.
The 5% market share counts that part. Yeah. When you say market share, the question that you're trying to answer is how much would we be able to capture? This takes into account everything: indirect substitutes, interest of the client, and everything, right?
You can also state like market share can be captured in two ways. Either you can target the current market and hence try and change customers from using a competitor's brand to your brand, or you can target the growing market, and because these are new customers which are buying, try and capture them first before your competition gets them.
A classic example here is Tata Sky and Tata Sky Plus, right? So a lot of the target segment for their new product Tata Sky Plus is the original Tata Sky owners, because they'll probably price it differently and so on to target this particular group. It is similar to what the kind of yeah.
Does that change how we progress in our approach? So whether we are acquiring the customer base from our competitor or whether we are targeting or growing a new segment altogether. So does that affect how we go ahead with our problem?
No, I don't see how it would have affected the approach here, because the number 5% here factors in everything. People who have security systems already, people who are going for competitor security systems, and so on, right? So this 5% is just the security system that we will be able to sell. That is our potential market, right? There's no confusion in market share now, right? Okay, let's hear out the, all right, one final question, then we'll go to the synthesis, right? We will say that again, I didn't get you. I'm still sort of lost in
so
the
his question is, doesn't the operating model of where we lie in the value chain affect the profit margin of the product? I think that was the same question that was asked earlier. So yes, the answer is it does affect. And so in that sense, the two questions that we ask are not completely distinct, but it's still a good idea to think of them separately. And then based on your findings on the operating model, you can just do a quick check. We know that we won't be entering, let's say, the distribution part, and we'll be outsourcing that, which might be an additional cost for us. Does this affect our profit margin in any way? You can check with the interviewer, and if he says yes, then you can factor that in. If no, then you can just move along anyways.
Right. Let's hear out the synthesis. I think taken enough time to, yeah.
So my recommendation would be that the telecom operator enters the home security market.
Okay.
The reason being, this seems to be a large enough market at 15 million households, and we can expect to get a 5% share at a good profit. The total profits that we are estimating after including fixed investments is roughly 65 crores.
Okay.
And also we've identified that we can manage both production as well as distribution
On our own.
on our own.
So we should enter solely, right?
Right.
All right. Thank you, Saransh.
Thank you.
That's it, right? So any doubts about the overall market entry framework? Right. Or rather, a better example here would be if the new product sabotages eats into their original customer base. Then that is a very, very good question actually. So what he asked was, if we are entering a new market, there might be a chance that it might have a negative impact on our current business, right? So a very objective way of doing this is calculate the potential profits that you're getting by the new business. Now calculate the changed profits that you're getting by because of the reduced business that you have from your first business, right? So Udar ka profits, they got reduced, and the second profits, they got higher. If you combine these and it's still higher than your previous profits, or it still meets the incremental profit expectation that you were needing, then it makes sense. Then it is an attractive enough move. Otherwise, it doesn't, right? That's the way I would go about it. Yeah. Yeah. There's no reason. We explored this, right, in the case. I said that our product is not differentiated and it is a commodity product like salt or sugar, maybe. There's only a few things that you can do with sugar, and different brands will still sell sugar, and there's no competitive advantage that you can get with it, right? Unless you like add iodine and so on. But even that goes only up to a certain extent. So it was not a differentiated product, and therefore your market share will only go up to a particular level. That we explored this particular question, right? Does that answer your question? But we did.
So I think your question is how will we even achieve that 5%, right? So I think we could have gone into the details of it. I sort of mentioned that we can look at certain geographies which are still underpenetrated and try and capture that local market. I guess in this case it just did not happen. We didn't happen to go into details of it. Some of the things you can do is you can ask, for example, how fast is the market growing?
Yeah.
And if the market is growing at 20-30%, that indicates that there is a room for new players to come in and capture either new product segments, new customer segments, etc. So it just so happened in this case, we didn't explore the full details of how exactly are we going to capture that extra 5%, given we have a commoditized product.
Right. And they would buy your product because the supply doesn't meet the demand here. There's still demand. There are 10 people who need the security system and only 9 systems are being supplied. So that is why they would buy. Right.
Shouldn't we compare this number with the company's net worth? Like, a company is worth billions of dollars, but this is a very small number.
Right. So I guess that depends upon what is the objective out here. I guess the objective of that question is the profit pool significant enough for the market entry? But that was addressed when I asked the interviewer that, do you think that this is a good enough market size for us to enter? And if you would have, let's say, said that, why do you not suggest me whether this is a good enough market, like a profit pool for us? Then we could have gone into, okay, what is the current profit pool, or what is the current value of your company, etc. What is the current revenue? But it just so happened that the interviewer said, yes, this is good enough, and then you can stop the analysis on that branch there.
Right. Any more questions? Right. So before we end the last session that we had, over these last 4 days, a lot of you have been asking a lot of questions to both of us, and there have been certain questions that were repeated a lot of times. So I would just like to answer those publicly right now so that everyone knows the answers to those questions. So the first one was, what are the references we should use for case prep, right? So I think Victor Cheng's videos plus the kind of 4-day bootcamp that you've got right now from what we taught should give enough theory for you to start solving cases right now. You can now proceed and solve cases on your own. That is what you should do. To get cases, you can use Case Interviews Cracked. It has 33 cases, which is written by Saransh himself. And those cases are... And one more senior of mine, Sankalp Case here. So those cases are really tuned in terms of difficulty and context to the Indian or rather even IIT wala placement scenario, right? So the difficulty is exactly what you might face in a real interview. That is why those are really good cases. If you're concerned that you want to keep those cases when you are very prepared, say after the shortlist come out or in the last 1 month, then you can Google out cases online or use case books like Kellogg's, HBS and so on. But a lot of times you will find cases that are out of context, right? You might want, the cases really exploit points like geography specific points. Like if the casebook is related to Australia, they would have things like the tattoo industry is very high, where here it's not, and things like those, right? So those context specific intricacies would make it difficult. So you will have to find out a little bit to read a case and then give it to your case partner. Do that for the first few days till your shortlist come out. Once the shortlists come out, your buddies will keep giving you cases, and then you can give each other those same cases that the buddies have been giving you. So then there would be no shortage of cases after the shortlist come out, right? So that's about the preparation material and sources of cases, right? Another question that one of you asked was, how do we present things on paper, right? So I'll just quickly draw that on the board. So you have an A4 blank sheet during your interview, right? So typically, except for guesstimates, you will keep the A4 sheet in landscape orientation to solve your case, right? This is what I used to do to like appear more structured. I used to draw a line here and here. This is where I would write the client's name, as in, is it an automobile client, is it a grocery retailer, or so on. I'll just quickly write grocery retailer over here, and here I'll write the problem statement. The profits are going down by 20%, or the sales have dropped, or we want to move to a new market, so on, right? So the main problem statement I would write over here, and here I'll write the objective of the company, right? The objective that we asked in market entry, why does the company, so profits or revenue or whatever, right? Then here I will draw out my main framework and try to do the calculations over here, all the rough calculations, and this place I would keep for synthesis. While I'm writing this, I would use two colors of pens, solve it with like a regular color, blue or black, and highlight this with something like red or green. Highlight main inferences with red or green, so that when you are taking that those 30 seconds for synthesis, you can quickly reach out to what was important, note that down, and just proceed, right? Sometimes you might not even need the synthesis wala part. You just quickly start by looking at the orange boxes itself and quickly summarizing, right? So that is how I would present on paper. Do you want to add something?
I would just add, like, this is a great way to present. Any calculations that you're doing, you can always have a separate sheet for that, so that your structure stays in order out here, and any calculations are done separately, and then the insights from that are brought to this main page.
And never write on the back side of this paper, because you will have to keep turning it to sort of cite your previous calculations.
Yeah, use a new sheet.
Use a new sheet. There's no
Paper
shortage.
is not a rare commodity in the case interview universe.
Right. And write really, like, people requested him to increase the font size, right? That is typically what happens in the interview itself too. The interviewer wants to look at what you're trying to write. So write larger, write freely, and so that it's legible, right? That's about writing. Yeah. Any more questions that you guys have? And think of questions that you asked yesterday.
I think someone had a question on how do I prep my case? But every time I give someone else a case, I'm losing out on a case.
Right. So that will happen only till your shortlist come out. Uske baad you will get fresh cases from your buddies all the time. Like, you'll have hundreds of cases to solve. So that is a concern only for a few days, and you can Google cases to get like more cases and so on. So there is no shortage of cases.
Also, the nature of the cases that are given in case interviews crack is that if you can just get any person, even a junior of yours, or even your dad, or your sister, or a sibling, or your mom, they can just go through the cases and then ask you the questions. So you just really need to find a person who sort of understands the case. You can give him a few explanation as to how to go about it and how to disclose information, and then you can have that person give you the case as well.
Right, and you can find cases everywhere in your life. So when I was preparing, my roommate was thinking of getting a refrigerator. So I gave this case to one of my other case buddies, and then he like had some really good insights. So I used those insights to tell my roomie and impress him. So this is something that you can always do. Just create cases around yourself.
When Sankalp and I were at the H3 canteen, we just were like, okay, let's look at how we can increase the profits of the canteen by 30%, and looked at all aspects of it. So you you can also pick up cases around. You can also look at headlines of news and see what could be a potential case, especially the economics and business section of newspapers.
Right. Yeah, so those were mostly the questions. Also, there were questions like what should be a case group size. I would say not more than 3. 3 is the best size. Yeah, and you can also go with
Everyone is
2.
thinking who's going to go out.
Yeah. So you can also practice amongst like you can have your roommate or so on. So just the 2 of you can also practice. Okay. I'm getting some really creepy smiles from the audience right now. But, sorry. So
4 is fine too. Just
yeah,
Even
2 is awesome. 3 is okay if you can do that. 4 is not. No. 4 does not really happen well. So what
sounds like how many co-founders there should be in a startup.
Yeah. No, I was. Okay, Saransh is like the real good boy here. But, okay. No, what happens when your case group goes more than 4 is that there are just too many people there, and it is a complete waste of time, really. So try not to make your case group larger. Yeah, that's about it.
So we'll be here for another 10-15 minutes if any of you have questions.
Yeah.
Otherwise, thanks a lot for coming for the sessions.
Thank you.